What's going on, guys? Welcome back to The Commodity. My name is Fez, and today we are taking a look at living in Australia versus America, 10 surprising similarities and differences. This one I think I found on my own. If it's in Discord, I apologize. I know I've got one that was suggested from Discord, and I will have to go back and look it up. But this one is, I think I found, because I like looking for things that compare the two, whether we're different or similar. So let's go ahead and jump into it. And if you have any suggestions for videos for me, link to our Discord will be down in the description. Click that link. There is a spot in our Discord that says video suggestions, so check that out. And then let's jump into it.
Australia and America, two countries located at the opposite ends of the globe, and as a result, two countries that cannot be more different from each other. Right? Wrong. Surprisingly, despite the fact that mainland America is about 7,000 miles away from Australia, there are quite a few similarities between living in America and Australia. I've had the pleasure of living in both countries. I currently live in America. I've been living in America for years, but I did have the chance to briefly live in Australia as well. So I know what I'm talking about when I compare living in America and Australia.
All right, don't beat this guy down. Obviously, it's been a while since he lived in Australia. Let's be nice. His information might be a little dated, but let's see what the similarities are and differences.
So in this video, I'm going to talk about the 10 interesting things that you should take into account when living in America versus Australia. And I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to dive into it right now. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is the food. All right, I'm just going to come out and say this. I actually think America has better food than Australia. Don't get me wrong, I think Australia has some great aspects of its cuisine. It has an awesome coffee culture. Australians know how to do coffee. And there are certain foods in Australia that are really good. But overall, I actually believe that America has better food. Australian cuisine is heavily influenced by British cuisine. That's why things like fish and chips and meat pies are so popular in Australia. Honestly, I think fish and chips and meat pies are everywhere in Australia. And Australian cuisine is also influenced by the millions of immigrants that have come to Australia over the last few decades. So you'll find a lot of Italian cuisine, Greek food, Vietnamese, Chinese food, Indian food. There are a lot of different cuisines that are very present in Australia. And that means that Australian food is very diverse, it's varied, and it's very good. On top of that, Australia has an awesome coffee culture. Australians know how to do coffee. Seriously, you guys have high standards for your coffee, and I really appreciated that when I lived there. And yeah, there are some local Australian foods that are also really good. Kangaroo meat is a thing in Australia. Australia is also known for Tim Tams, which is an absolutely delicious chocolate-covered cookie. And of course, Vegemite is a typical Australian spread, which I didn't like at first, but once you put it on toast with butter, it's actually pretty decent. But honestly, I do feel like you get better food in America. That's just because I feel like there's a lot more diversity in the cuisine here in America. For example, the Southwest of the United States has a cuisine that is distinct from that of New England, and New England cuisine is quite a bit different from Southern cuisine. So America is known for its variety and diversity of food options. On top of that, just like in Australia, immigrants to America have also brought their own cuisines, and therefore America has a great selection of Italian, Mexican, Middle Eastern, Indian, Chinese cuisine as well. Overall, I feel like American cuisine is better. I feel like the food in America is very, very tasty. With that being said, I will say that Australia does deliver high quality stuff, especially when it comes to its coffee. Its coffee is friggin' good. All right,
Okay, so based off of that, y'all's coffee is good, but I'm not a huge coffee drinker, so that doesn't do it for me very much. But I always tell people I'm a garbage disposal. I don't really care. I will always eat whatever's in front of me, kind of thing. Obviously, y'all know that there are certain foods that I don't like mint or anything like along those lines, or black licorice or anything like that. It would be hard for me to argue against the fact that the U.S. would have worse food than Australia, just because of population. And we have a lot of famous chefs and all that kind of stuff. So can it get pretty mundane depending on where you eat? Absolutely. We have fast food literally everywhere. But I think we eat a lot less fast food than what people think. I think that we go out and buy a lot of food. The problem is, I think a lot of people have this idea like everybody's either really fat or really skinny. But there's a lot of people like in the middle. I would say I'm truly in the middle. I'm a little husky, but I'm also very strong. But like when it comes to eating, I eat pretty healthy. But it's just a large country with a lot of people. I think that's what the main thing is here. Just remember, we're the third largest populated country, the third largest size, and we have a lot of jobs that bring in a lot of people from all over the world. So I think that's just, and people want to bring their own cuisine, and some people move here just to bring their own cuisine because they know that there's a group of people. Like we have a Chinatown here in Dallas, Fort Worth. We also have like Koreatown. We have Chinatown. We have just like an Asian area. We have obviously Mexican. We have Middle Eastern. There's a ton of Middle Eastern here. So, and I'm just talking about my town alone. And we've been able to find Malaysian restaurants. We've been able to find Filipino restaurants. Those are probably going to be the hardest things to find because they're so far east. But like European food, so easy to find, literally everywhere. So I just think that's just statistics, not necessarily because we're in a better location. I think it's just we're a bigger country population-wise, so we're going to have more people to cook. So odds are they're going to have a little bit better options. So it is what it is.
Second thing I'm going to talk about is the climate and weather of each country. I think America, depending on how you measure it, is the fourth largest country in the world. And Australia is, I believe, right behind it at number 5 or number 6.
We're number 3 in size behind Russia and Canada. And we're number 3 in size by population behind China and India. And then it's us. So we're third and third, just behind 4 different countries.
6. So both countries are huge, but here's what I'll say. Australia, for the most part, is a very warm and hot country. Most of the interior of the country is a hot desert. Meanwhile, certain parts of the country, namely in the south of Australia, see a more Mediterranean climate. I think this is the case around Perth and around Adelaide. And then the east coast of Australia, particularly the northeast of Australia, sees a more tropical or subtropical climate. And that's also true for areas around Brisbane, the Gold Coast, and I think even areas around Sydney as well. Melbourne, Australia and Tasmania see more temperate climate. But with that being said, in general, Australia is a very warm and hot country. Most areas don't see much snowfall, if any snowfall at all. Snow and freezing temperatures is not something that a lot of Australians experience, if ever. On the other hand, again, America is just so big, you see pretty much every single type of climate and weather in America. You got deserts, you got the Arctic, you got the tropics, you got a temperate climate up in the Northeast and around the Great Lakes. You got a subtropical climate in the south of the United States. You got the Great Plains, you got alpine climate up in the mountains, you got a Mediterranean climate in California. I think that pretty much covers it. Yeah, you got pretty much every single type of climate and weather in the United States. It's very diverse in its climate, and I think that's what makes America one of the most appealing places to live in. You can basically pick the type of climate that's right for you and live in a region that appeals to you based on its climate. All right.
Now, those Mediterranean climate areas, he's not wrong. I think this is actually very well laid out for the United States. You go up north, it's horrendously cold in certain parts. If you go northeast or northwest, a lot of those areas are very cold, but because they're right off the coast, you don't get a lot of snow. However, lately they've been getting more snow than they usually do. If you go to like California, I mean, if you go to like LA, San Diego, you're talking about like, yes, this year you may have gotten highs in the 90s, but they get like an average of like 80 something degrees Fahrenheit. And that's why one of the reasons that it's so expensive to live there. Plus just the fact that you're right on the beach and you're also near mountains and you're also near, I mean, you're near everything, but so far away from everything with all the congestion. So, I mean, it's really a cool place. I like Dallas area that I live in now. We get snow. We get very good summers. This summer was ridiculous. We were well into the hundreds all for 3 months straight, roughly. Right now we're getting a ton of rain. We had flash flooding a week ago, I believe. In fact, my parents called and were like, "Are you safe?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we're safe." Apparently, we had a flash flood here in Dallas that I didn't even know about. I was like, "Oh yeah, well, when you don't go out, you don't have to deal with it." Plus, I live so high up, it would take some serious flash flood. Okay, so Flushing is flash flood together, just so you know. But yeah, no, I mean, it's just so diverse. I can go 5 hours south of here and to San Antonio where my parents live, and it's a desert. There's like no grass. So it's kind of interesting how that kind of works out. So
the next thing I'll talk about are the things to do in each country. And both countries offer a lot for those living there or for those visiting. Australia has so many outdoor activities that you can participate in. You can go hiking out in the outback. You can visit the wine country in South Australia. You can go snorkeling or scuba diving in the Great Barrier Reef. You can go sailing off the coast of Queensland. You can visit some pretty awesome cities like Sydney and Melbourne. There are plenty of sporting events happening in Australia too, like the Australian Open and the Formula One Australia Grand Prix in Melbourne as well. It's a great country, particularly if you want to do some outdoor activities. Australia is fantastic for that. With that being said, I gotta say, America offers more things to do. Not only does America have some of the world's most renowned cities like New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami, but it also has some of the world's most preeminent vacation destinations like Las Vegas and Orlando, Florida, known for its theme parks. America also has the great outdoors as well. You can go surfing off the coast of California or Hawaii. You can go hiking up in the Appalachian Mountains or the Rocky Mountains. You can go skiing or snowboarding pretty much anytime during the winter. You can have a great time in some of the party cities of America like Nashville and New Orleans. There are just a lot of things to do in America. You're never going to be bored living in America. I don't think you'll ever get bored living in Australia too, but there are just more options and more things to do in the United States. All right, I kind of touched upon this earlier.
Simple, same thing I've been saying. Just has to do with size, population, those kind of things. I'm sure there's actually better places in Australia, but Nashville is fucking awesome. That's where I grew up. I was too young to truly get into it. I did go back and get into it a little bit, but Nashville's awesome. It's they call it Nash Vegas, or during hockey season it's Smashville. But yeah, no, I mean it's an awesome place. If you like live music, they don't just do country there. They do rock and roll. They do just about anything live. It's got one of the best nightlives, cities wise. And then you got like Austin, same concept, just a little bit smaller. Actually, they're probably about the same size now. And then you have, it's just simple. Like Dallas has its own kind of nightlife. It's more of a bar scene, not as much open, regular music, or live music. Fort Worth has its own thing. They're more into live music than we are. It's not that I don't like live music. It's just the bar scene is more like get drunk and hang out, not like a club. Houston is huge into clubs. They got those big giant warehouses turned into clubs. It looks really cool. Kind of like Blade, the movie, where they get the where the clubs are, where they're big giant buildings and just nothingness and just a DJ up on the top. It's pretty much Houston, so it's really cool.
But the fourth thing I'm going to talk about is the wild, is the great outdoors, and the things that you can do outside in both countries. And both countries have their fair share of things to do in the great outdoors. Like I said earlier, in America, you can go snowboarding or skiing in the Rocky Mountains, in the Appalachian Mountains as well. There are plenty of national parks and trails in which you can go hiking in. You got desert attractions like the Grand Canyon to check out as well. If you want to check out some coral reefs in the tropics, well, you can do that in Florida or in Hawaii. And if you just want to chill by a lake, well, America's got plenty of lakes and rivers for that too. America does have the Great Lakes, and there are plenty of water activities to do on those Great Lakes so long as they're not frozen. Australia has much of the same thing. You know, you do have some ski resorts, although I think that the ski resorts in Australia pale in comparison to the ski hills in North America, specifically in the Rocky Mountains of the United States.
Yeah, of course.
The Great Barrier Reef is a great spot for scuba diving and snorkeling, or even some sailing. You could take a road trip down the Great Ocean Road in Victoria. You could hike some mountains as well, so there are plenty of outdoor things to do in Australia too. The next thing I'm going to talk about are its people, and both Americans and Australians are similar in certain ways and pretty different in other ways. I think the similarities include the fact that both Australia and America have people that come from different walks of life. You have people that are born and raised in America and Australia, and you also have a lot of immigrants that come from different parts of the world. You have people from small towns, people from big cities. And in general, I have to say that both Americans and Australians are actually pretty outgoing people. Whenever I travel around the world, the people that are most noticeable when I'm in different countries, like let's say for example, if I'm traveling throughout Europe, the people that are most noticeable are Australians and Americans. I don't know why, they just stand out the most. But one thing I have to say that sets them apart is that Americans actually tend to be a little bit friendlier. All right, so I just got a few more points I want to bring up, but before I do so, I want to let you know that
I think it's because he's American, he finds Americans more friendly. I assume we're probably about the same. I know a lot of douchebag Americans that I would never want to introduce to anybody. But as an American, I'll probably be more warmly open treated than if I was in Australia. I could be wrong, but I think they're probably about the same. I mean, it would take, yes, down in the South, we're very, very open. If you tell us you're from New York or California, we're going to talk mad shit, even though I prefer the politics from California and New York for that matter. It's just fun to talk shit. It's kind of like that state pride. So
whether you've seen my content before or if this is the first time viewing one of my videos, go ahead and subscribe to my channel content, and it helps me out. YouTube likes it when people like my videos. And by the way, I'm also on Instagram, so feel free to follow me there as well. All right, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is safety. And I gotta say that both countries are pretty safe countries to live in. When living in Australia, I noticed that there were very few bad neighborhoods in some of the big cities of Australia. And even some of the bad neighborhoods were not necessarily that dangerous. So Australia is a pretty safe country. When looking at the crime index of Australia, you can see that it's comparable to other safe countries as well. And the same thing can be said about living in the United States, although I feel that there are a few more neighborhoods that you simply just don't want to walk into. Some neighborhoods are legitimately dangerous.
Those neighborhoods are called Detroit, Houston, and Memphis. Just stay away.
So in general, both countries are very safe. You know, we took a look at the crime index of Australia just a moment ago, but here's the crime index of the United States as well. Again, it's very...
So like, I think 6 points higher, which again, statistically, with the population difference, I think that's pretty damn good. However, when you put it next to Iraq, that's pretty sad. And then Egypt, Egypt is doing better than we are, and they've had like major issues. It's all right, I guess.
Very comparable to other pretty safe countries too, but there are a few more violent crimes that happen in America, and there are more neighborhoods that you simply just don't want to go to at all. All right,
every city has a neighborhood you need to stay out of.
Wealth, and both countries are very wealthy countries. In fact, both countries are some of the wealthiest countries in the world. If we take a look at the GDP per capita of both the United States and Australia, we can tell that both countries are up there in terms of GDP per capita. The United States really being amongst the highest in the world, but Australia...
That was so fast.
Per capita.
So U.S. is number 7 per capita. Luxembourg, Jesus Christ. Singapore, Qatar, Ireland. I had no idea about Ireland. Switzerland, Norway. This is, I'll be honest, I don't know much about Qatar. I know it's an oil country. Singapore, I know quite a bit about Singapore. Luxembourg, I know nothing about. Ireland, I know very little about. I just know where it's at and about it. But Switzerland and Norway being some of the more rich countries in the world is pretty nice. Brunei, I had no idea. Macau? UAE, I'm amazed UAE isn't higher up. I figured UAE would be up here per capita. Hong Kong, I had no idea about Hong Kong. Now, would this be Hong Kong before they were kind of going back with China? Because this would be kind of British as well, which I'm amazed I don't see England or Great Britain or anything like that, or whatever. And then we have Denmark.
The United States really being amongst the highest in the world, but Australia not.
Oh yeah, Australia is like right there. I think Australia would be higher considering the per capita is what we're going off of. Bahrain, Finland, Belgium, Australia, Sweden, Germany, Taiwan, Iceland, Austria, San Marino, Netherlands. I don't know why I stuttered when I said that. And Denmark. That's interesting.
Not too far behind as well. So both countries are very wealthy countries. They're very developed countries. And I feel that the standard of living and the quality of life in both countries is, as a result, very, very high. Getting around in Australia is a pretty easy thing to do. Australia has a very mature and extensive airline industry. So traveling from city to city is very easily done by air. There are literally dozens and dozens of flights between Australia's major cities every single day. So if you're gonna go from Melbourne to Sydney or from Brisbane to Perth, you can easily do that by air. And transportation within the major cities is also pretty easily done. I felt like all the major cities in Australia had a pretty extensive transportation network, be it by bus, streetcar, train, or subway. The one thing that I think would be hard to do in Australia would be to drive from one major city to the next. For example, I'm not too sure if there is a undivided highway linking Melbourne to Adelaide, for example, or Brisbane to Perth. I think that getting around by car, if you want to go from one state to the next or one major city to the next, I think getting around by car is a pretty hard thing to do. I feel like their interstate highway network is not as extensively developed as it is in the United States. Speaking of the United States,
So what's the most common way of driving from or getting from the West Coast to the East Coast? Because it's Perth over there on the west, I think. I'm so bad with geography. Do you not drive that? Like in the U.S., some people would drive that. I know people that absolutely hate flying, and one of them is from New York. Or no, he's from, technically he's Canadian, but he grew up a good portion of his life in upstate New York, and he hates flying. A drive from Dallas to upstate New York, which I think he's from Syracuse. Hey, Google, how far am I from Syracuse?
Okay, but first you'll have to unlock your device.
So let's see here.
It's 1,491 miles to get to your current location from Syracuse by car.
So it's literally 1,491 miles, 24 hours almost. Hey, Google, 1,491 miles to kilometers.
1,491 miles is 2,000.
So 2,400 kilometers. Almost exactly 2,400 kilometers to get to Syracuse from here. And this guy will drive that every time that he goes on vacation up there. So he wastes probably 4 days of vacation just driving when you could do that in probably a 4-hour flight, maybe 5 hours. That's dumb. I mean, it saves him a lot of money because flights aren't that cheap. How do you say that? Within the country. But yeah, it's expensive.
easy as it is to get around in Australia, it's probably even easier in the United States. America also has a very large and expansive airline industry. Pretty much every single city and town has an airport that you can fly into. On top of that, the interstate highway system is very extensive. Using the interstate highway, you can pretty much get to any part of the country that you want. And then the major cities do have a pretty expansive public transportation network. So getting around in America is just as easy, if not easier, than getting around in Australia. All right, I just got a couple more points I'm gonna talk about, but the ninth thing I'm gonna be speaking about are the sports in both countries. And both Americans and Australians like their sports, although it appears as though they like different types of sports. In America, the most popular team sports to watch and play are football, baseball, basketball, hockey, and soccer is also gaining in popularity. But in Australia, I think soccer is pretty popular in Australia, but Australians also like sports like rugby league, rugby union, cricket, and Australian rules football, the AFL. So despite the fact that both countries like their sports, the sports that they happen to like are pretty different from one another. But then again, Americans do like their golf and their tennis and their swimming, and so do Australians. Australians are very good at golf, tennis, swimming. Also, Americans tend to like their IndyCar and NASCAR, whereas Australians prefer Formula One. All right, the 10th and last thing.
We have Formula One here too. The auto sport industry is not it's not as big as it once was, because drag racing used to be humongous. NASCAR, all that stuff used to be humongous. But MotoGP, Formula One, like we have a Formula One track down by Austin. It's called Track of the Americas or something like that. It's just so expensive to keep open that it's probably not going to last much longer.
I'm going to be speaking about is education, namely the quality of the universities in each country. And while Australia does have some world-renowned universities like the University of Melbourne, the University of New South Wales, the University of Sydney, I think that America wins in this category because America's got some of the world's finest universities like Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Chicago, MIT. I don't think any country in the world comes close to the United States in terms of the number of high quality universities that it delivers. The United States just offers a plethora of very high quality universities that I don't think any country can match. So you're gonna get an amazing education whether you study in Australia or in America, but I'm just saying that America has more top-notch, high quality, world-renowned institutions. Let me know what you guys think of the points I brought up in this list. Is there anything that I was wrong about? Did I miss anything? Please.
I think one of the main things that he did miss out on is like high school, middle school, secondary, primary, whatever you want to call it. Those schools. That's where the U.S. really lacks. So this is going to be a big information, maybe too much information about me. So I didn't do well in high school. I got graduated. I was basically forced to graduate. They had this thing going on at the time. It was called No Child Gets Left Behind. It was introduced, I want to say, by George H.W. Bush, or it could have been done by George W. Bush. H.W. would be dad, W would be son. But they had a system in that was no kid gets left behind. So kids were being pushed through school. Now, I chose to be dumb because I went back and got a degree. My GPA is somewhere right around a 3.9, like a 3.98 or something like that. Max of 4. I don't know if y'all use the same GPA system. So I had no issue with education. I learned very easily. I wouldn't say I have an eidetic memory or a, what's it called, where you just like photographic memory, but I have a memory that helps me, like, I don't know. I like to learn now, but when I was a kid, I was dumb as a box of rocks when I graduated high school. But like I said, I finished with, on the dean's list, I finished with a couple of degrees, actually, technically. But my high school, they didn't care. They just pushed us along. They got rid of that system. But we also run on a system of, I'm sure y'all have heard of it. If y'all don't have it, the SATs, I forgot what the other one was, tests to get into your colleges. And then you have a state test. And these schools are pushed to teach these state tests so you graduate, because that's how the states get funded, based on the placement that your school gets. And that tells you how much you make. So it's a broken system. No system should be based off your testing because it's just an unfair advantage. You go to inner city schools where they have more students, where as opposed to suburban schools where they have more teachers, higher budgets, higher financial backings. Taxes are higher because where you live is where your taxes go, even if you don't have kids. If I lived right here, which I don't have a kid that goes to the school that I live next to, but I'm still paying taxes towards that school if I own this property, which technically I don't. So I don't pay the taxes to it, but somebody does. So yeah, that's the number one thing. Yes, I think our universities are hands down untouchable. Like as far as like an overall thing, just the amount of universities we have in this country. Hey Google, how many universities are in the United States?
USnews.com, though the U.S. Department of Education tallies nearly 4,000 colleges and universities, U.S. News included just 1,452 schools in the 2021 rankings.
Okay, so it's between 1,400 and 4,000 I'm sure a lot of those. So there are much smaller universities. In fact, there's one that my parents both worked at called University of the Americas. It's basically a religious university, but they also teach other things. But the amount of students that went to that school are like very minimal, but great teachers. I mean, my mom was one and my dad was one. So that's where I think the main difference is. High school, middle school, elementary, those schools suck compared to the rest of the world. Universities were at least equal, if not better than most countries. So that's where I stand. That's just an opinion. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and we'll go from there. Guys, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button. If you want to see my future videos, hit the subscribe button and the bell notification. If you want to support me directly, which right now every penny I get from that is going to go straight to my traveling budget, because it's going to happen. I'm sick and tired of saying it's going to happen. I'm ready to make it happen. So the likes and subscribes are going to make it happen. So with that being said, my name is Fez. See y'all next time. Peace.